Hey, Next Level Agent podcast listeners, we are back. And today I am joined, this is a special one because I'm joined by Glenn Sanford. And Glenn, how are you doing today?
Awesome, Kevin. Yeah, getting over Turkey Day a little bit and ready to get back at it.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have this. For most listeners, I'm sure know this. Glenn is the founder of eXp Realty. And while I don't talk about it a lot on the podcast, that is the brokerage that my business partner and I run our real estate sales business with. And we've been in business with Glenn and the rest of eXp now for just over a year and a half, and obviously love it here. But one of the things I love most about this company really is Glenn, you personally, and kind of your vision and the way you sort of shape things. So I've been excited about doing this interview for a while. So I'm so glad we got together today to be able to do this.
Oh, no, this is my pleasure.
Well, tell us, why don't we start with a little bit of your background, Glenn, for the few people that haven't seen you on stage at Inman every year for the past, 6 or 7 years now. It seems like you've been a regular there and getting a lot of coverage because of the cool things our company is doing in the space. Tell us about, who's Glenn Sanford? I mean, how long have you been in the real estate industry? And I think it's important. What did you do before that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess technically, I got my real estate license back in 2002. So I actually joined on a team, and prior to that, actually in I think it was 97 or 98, I actually had a bunch of real estate specific domain names, and I actually tried to market it to a local real estate brokerage here locally. And I actually got my license back then, but just because they were trying to figure out how to leverage me at that time. But I wasn't serious about real estate. But in 2002, I got into real estate, ran a local website called birchbay.net. It was for the local community. We had 5,000 people that lived in Birch Bay during the year, about 10,000 during the summer. So it wasn't a big community, but the biggest realtor in the area actually brought me on to his team to manage stuff, generate leads for him locally. And so that's what I did. So I did that for a couple of years on his team. Actually started to generate leads for actually a few different agents in other markets because I was a big SEO lead gen guy. And so I ended up moving over to KW back in 2004, and then was there through 2007. And so built a good sized team. Actually ended up, I think, top 50 nationally with Keller, which was in 2006, which was pretty cool. 4th year in the business, being at that level, and then went independent. Started my own real estate firm, Buyer Tours Realty, in 2007, and then had a great 2007. 2008, we were on track to do about 100 million in production as a team, and then the market turned on us, as many of us remember that were back in the business then, and then I get 2008, late 2008, 2009, we literally went to sort of the minimum cost to run a brokerage to stay in business, getting rid of all the offices and scaling back the staff and trying to figure out what we were going to do going forward. So prior to that, I'd been involved with a few different internet startups, companies, mainly companies I'd started. A company called Interactive Cafe was and stolen the domain name icafe.com, was the largest online service in Western Canada that I founded back in about 94, 95. In 1999, I founded a company called eshippers.com, which was an outsourced e-commerce logistics company. And we actually had 217 warehouses through United Landlines and Mayflower Transit to do pick and pack fulfillment. We were partnered with another company called Card Service International, which was the largest privately held credit card clearing company with about 1,700 reps to actually go sell these services. And we actually raised a bit of money, but unfortunately didn't raise enough going into the dot-com collapse. So, had we got enough funding, I probably wouldn't be in residential real estate because, as we know, e-commerce and logistics has actually been a pretty good gig for a few companies out there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got to say, yeah, selfishly, I'm kind of glad that didn't work out for you, man, because what I love about what you've done is created something that is, first of all, I think it's much needed in our industry, like you, but and so forward thinking, and it's just something I'm personally very grateful for. The model that you've created. I guess the thing that I think about, Glenn, when I think about you, you and I have a mutual friend, and I won't name them, but they got us on the phone together. Just, I don't know, not quite 2 years ago, but got you and I on the phone together, and I remember talking to you, and a couple minutes in, it must have been about 5 or 10 minutes in, I said to myself, like, gosh, I feel like this guy understands me and my problems that I have as a real estate agent who, now granted, we're not your typical real estate agent team. We're operating in multiple cities and multiple states, and we've got a lot of agents. Almost we look like a brokerage inside of a brokerage, right? We've kind of got those types of, I'll call them problems or opportunities.
Right.
And the thing that stuck out to me in that phone call with you, and this was the thing that got me, is I went, I feel like Glenn has already either thought of the solution to that problem or is currently thinking of how to solve that problem without me ever even telling you those were my problems. And that was the first time I can remember in my, at that time, 10 and a half, almost 11-year real estate career. It was the first time I ever felt like somebody really understood those types of problems I was having as a business owner. And so I look at that and I go, okay, you created this thing called eXp Realty now, just passed over the 10-year anniversary mark earlier, within the last 5-6 months. And it's, a lot of people feel like this is a brand new company in the last 2 or 3 years because of that exponential hockey stick growth you've had.
Yep.
But indeed, you launched in 2009. Where did the idea for this? You mentioned kind of the crash, right? Needing to be able to do this with minimum cost monthly. Like, where did the idea for eXp Realty come from, and what were those early days like?
Yeah. So there's a few different pieces that all came together. Thinking about the fact that it was 2009, so 10 years ago. At the time I was 42, and I'd done enough different things that I sort of learned what worked and what didn't work. And a lot of companies, as you know, are about short-term profit maximization, but the companies that actually grow large actually are about really deferring the net income of an enterprise for as long as possible. It's, and you can look at, a lot of technology startups, especially. I mean, Google gave away G Suite for how many years now? How many people basically are addicted to G Suite and are paying them big money for it, and all the plugins and everything else. And so there was some formative stuff about running low cost using a technology stack, even though we didn't really refer to it as that point, but just recognizing that we had, I like to say that this is really what revolutionized everything. It's when the first iPhone came out, and right thereabouts we had 3G, and so we finally had high-speed internet that was mobile. We didn't actually have to go to the office to attach ourselves to the T1 that was coming into the office, and so there was a few things that happened, and I'd recognized literally probably since I was like 14, 15 years old, I was always a business guy in my head, and I started to just recognize that if you saw where a trend was going, instead of waiting for the trend, you should start building into that trend early. And so that was something that at 42 years old, started to recognize where the trends were. We were talking about paperless. We were talking about being agents being entirely mobile and not needing to go to an office. We were talking, like, the industry was talking about that stuff. Everybody was talking about, but nobody was actually doing it. And for us, when we looked at it in 2009, we said, we need to build that model now. And because eventually things are going to go this way, some version of either bricks and mortar light or technology only, brokerage, you're going to plug in. That's where it's going, high-speed internet again, and finally got to a point where it's finally usable. So that really was kind of the backdrop. And then the second part of it was assuming we could get cobbled together, and I use cobble together sort of as a kind of a accurate term at the time. We cobbled together the right tools that we could afford at that point in time. The second part was what would it take for me to want to step away from my physical bricks and mortar office? And so, so we started to look at, some different things that we would need to do. One, we needed to better cap and split model. We needed to basically provide a lot of services via the web. And the virtual office was a component of building collaboration and community. So we wanted to figure out a way to do that. And then the last piece was, given that we both had a history at Keller, I loved the Keller model and the way that they approached their profit share, their 7-level profit share system. Unfortunately, what didn't work as well for me as it has worked for others. I mean, I know some people that do really well and are still at Keller, and so it's worked well. But for me, it didn't work as well, and so we decided we need to put sort of a revenue sharing component. But those were some of the things. The other piece, I think you were alluding to this earlier, is I was probably one of the first people to truly do expansion teams before there ever was a term called expansion teams. So in 2004, when I actually started my first team, by 2005, I already started my second team in Nashville, Tennessee. I started a team in Portland, Oregon, probably right there, maybe a year later. I actually had launched a website and you'll know this person down there in Arizona. I actually built a site for Mike Mendoza, because he was actually the regional owner up in the Pacific Northwest. So he and I chatted, and so I built a site down there and generated about 500 leads on that site, and got 0 closings out of it. So I had to fire Mike. So Mike, if you're watching this, I'm sorry about that, dude. So we ran an ad on Craigslist looking for somebody. That's actually how I hooked up with Brian Colhane. He actually was the guy who actually built the team out there in Arizona. But I actually built out 6 teams at the peak. We were running Bellingham, Seattle, Portland, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Nashville, Tennessee, and then we were incubating some 2 or 3 smaller teams as we were going into the crash. And then we sort of consolidated and got rid of a few of the less performing teams, and just sort of started from scratch. But I was dealing with having to deal with different market centers and trying to get paid, and if agents didn't want to pay on the leads that were generated. I mean, a bunch of stuff I'm sure you've dealt with over the years. And we figured, if we could just build one brokerage that had, and basically build up the entire infrastructure, then all of those problems start to go away. And so that was the other part, was what do I need to do to sort of continue to scale a team if I kept it going? What would be the infrastructure?
Awesome. The thing I always talk about or think about is, a lot of people look at, and myself included, even to this day, as much as I love the functionality of it, look at eXp World, right? Our online campus, the virtual campus, as it's kind of weird, right? And what I love, this is one of the things, Glenn, I truly appreciate about you, is here we are. We're recording this. It's the first week in December of 2019. It's now accepted, right? This virtual thing is now really becoming to get accepted, but it still feels weird to most of us,
Right.
and to most of the world. But 10 years ago, you were like, hey, let's go make this virtual real estate brokerage. And that's truthfully one of the things that I appreciate about you is, number one is, I guess what I'm saying is, did you see this actually becoming a virtual reality play? Or was it just, I know it was obviously mobile first needed to be the play that you were leaning into in that trend, but was the virtual piece something you were leaning into from the get-go as well?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally the reason why, and there are some companies that don't have offices that have tried to build their brokerage, but their brokerages haven't grown that significantly. Now, you could look at single markets like Phoenix metro area. HomeSmart's done really well with a low-cost model. but they've had trouble expanding much outside of the Phoenix metro area. That's still, probably 80% of their business comes from that one single market, and they got a bunch of small little satellites. And Matt Widows, of course, was there, and he was so it had leadership there. And so one of the concepts that I was trying to play with back in 2009 was, how do you distribute leadership? And I'd learned a lesson around. I lived in Bellingham, Washington, basically, and then I loved to go to Arizona, and so those two teams did the best of all the teams because I traveled there. Even Seattle, I didn't go to very often, even though it was only an hour and a half away. But I'd go to Phoenix, and so I'd spend time with the team there. And so I learned this concept that in order to scale an enterprise that's geographically dispersed, you have to figure out a way to be truly engaged, all the time. And we were using Yahoo Instant Messenger, and we were using, we did Facebook private groups and those types of things. But we needed a place that we call our office, and we needed a place where people could find me and have water cooler conversations, and vice versa. And that was the thing we were trying to solve for. And so we were going, how do we make sure that our agents don't feel like orphans inside the organization? Because just imagine if you were dealing with eXp and your interface with eXp was simply a web page.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, and so but that's how most, we call it, virtual brokerages operate. Their brokerage is simply a web page. Maybe they got a private intranet of conversations, but there's nothing that's truly engages all the senses. And that's what a virtual world, in my view, represent. Keep in mind, I had a little bit of experience. I had worked for AOL at one point. I built the largest online service in Western Canada called Interactive Cafe. I had a pretty good understanding of the limitations of social networks, even before social networks existed. And this really provided that sense of place. The other thing that was really critical was I didn't actually take phone calls. So if people wanted to visit with me, they wanted to see the eXp Explain presentation. I was doing them all the time. They'd actually come in world. And so somebody had to actually sit down with somebody and say, hey, you got to check out this eXp thing. And they gave them a little bit of a high level overview. And then if people were willing to sort of go through the exercise of downloading the software, installing it on their computer, troubleshooting whatever they needed to troubleshoot to come in, if they came in, they're in. Like it was like the best filtering mechanism to actually talk to people who are actually interested in being here. And so I didn't really do a lot of bad pitches because they'd already done the heavy lifting. And then if they'd done the heavy lifting, then they got the aha moments going, this is so cool. I can't believe nobody else is doing this. But if I would have had a phone call with them, they would never have come in, and they would never have had that experience.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that. That's a really, really good way to look at that. And just even as you were starting to explain that, I was seeing like, oh my gosh, yeah, they've now gone through all the different levels or layers of a funnel that you could go through, and they've gotten rid of their own. Like if they get that far, they're pretty much 95% of the way there. They get the power of what you're about to show them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's fun too. I mean, it's something they're not going to do every day. And certainly not in their real life unless they're playing Fortnite. And so they're going to come in, they're going to have this different experience. But the other part, I'd been involved with Second Life back in 2007, 2006, 2007, 2008. And the challenge that I saw with Second Life was that you didn't have a commonality with the people that you're running into. So you're walking through Second Life, and you don't want to start talking to quote unquote strangers in Second Life. And that's the reason why I don't think it ever took off, is because it didn't have a core theme other than it just being a place to be social. And they tried to create themes, but they didn't have enough density, or didn't get up to enough population and be able to sort of push people to the right spaces to actually feel like they belong. With eXp, everybody belongs the moment that they come in, because they're all in residential real estate. They're dealing with exactly the same issues of listing and working with buyers and negotiations and all of that. So it's so narrowly casting the net for a virtual world actually is probably one of the reasons why it's worked for us and it hasn't worked for the quote unquote social networks.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had not thought about that, but you're right. I mean, we instantly, we've got a connection to every single person that happens to be in world that day, right? So I log into the eXp world, and everybody there is either also a licensed real estate agent and or an employee of eXp Realty, and in often cases both, which gives us this context right away, right off the bat. So it doesn't matter if there's 10 of our agents in there or 25,000, or I don't know what the capacity has ever been at one time, but as an example, we've got this connection to each other that does make for a context that's easy for everybody to understand and relate to.
Yep. Yeah. And it does glue together, because it doesn't matter whether you're talking to, some of the agents that are now joining us in the UK or Australia. You talk to them, you already have a common language, a common occupation. When you ask about the housing market, you actually sort of understand what they're talking about. So all of a sudden, you feel like a kindred spirit, no matter where you're at in eXp world.
That's so cool. So tell me, okay, so there's some other unique things about eXp, and obviously one of those things is the fact that we're a publicly traded company, which I totally respect, because it's a publicly traded company. I'm definitely not going to ask you to say anything that we can't. But I guess what I'm wondering is, okay, so you built this. At what point did you decide, hey, we should have a publicly traded company, real estate company? So it's one thing not to franchise and to have one brand across the U.S., but where was the idea, I guess, to go public and to make this available, not to the real estate agents who are members of this company?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to do back in 2008, I actually met Randall Miles, who I think you may have met him. He's on our board. So I met him. He actually liked the previous iteration of what we were doing in real estate buyer tours realty. And he was actually wanting to actually put money into the previous company. He's been an investment banker, and he was in Seattle at the time. And actually his business partner at the time bought a home through one of our agents. And so we had a really unique business model. But I visited with him a few times, but the thing I wanted to figure out was how to get shares in the hands of agents. And the big challenge for private companies, especially at that time, since then there's been the Jobs Act and there's a couple other things that have happened that make it easier. But at that point in time, you couldn't have more than 33 non-accredited shareholders in a private company, and which basically means you make over $250,000 a year, or you have a net worth of over $1 million, not including your home. So it's pretty finite set of people, and real estate agents, most of them don't make that type of income and don't have that kind of net worth. So it doesn't really provide a vehicle for ownership. So we wanted to figure out, how do we get a vehicle for ownership? So we actually talked around a number of different scenarios, and the only one that really solves it is being a public company. So in 2013, we were finally to the point of size, which was we were about 300 agents or so, which doesn't sound like much now, but at the time that was a big deal. But we were finally to a size where we could start to actually bring the two together, bring a public company vehicle together with eXp, and we actually bought the public company. So instead of the public company buying us or us going public, we bought a public company that already existed. So we could actually share equity with our agents and brokers. And part of this came about two reasons. One, we had the original idea back in 2008, 2009. But in 2012, I had an opportunity in probably the fall of 2012 to go to a T. Harv Eker Millionaire Mind Intensive event. And it was a great event. And if you've never been, I certainly wouldn't discourage anybody from going. But about halfway through the event, I just had this aha moment that I wasn't thinking big enough, and I wasn't thinking big enough for our existing agent base. Not for me personally, but I wasn't thinking big enough for them in terms of what the ambition was for the organization. And so that was the point in time where we said, hey, we really need to start looking for a public vehicle. So it was really late 2012, early 2013, and by mid 2013, we'd finally found the vehicle. We had got it cleaned up, and then we actually did the merge in October. But it was really this idea that if agents wanted to get to a point from a revenue sharing component, because that's a big part of why agents join us, we needed to provide them as many tools as possible to help us grow the company together. And equity ownership just made a ton of sense. And since then, the company's grown substantially since we introduced those ownership initiatives. So it was to help give agents a tool to go out there and help grow the brokerage.
So, you just, I wasn't planning to ask this question, but you just kind of made me think of something. So here you are, go back 15 years, probably, or at least prior to starting eXp Realty. And, you're running a team, or even prior to that, you're running the one team, and then you start generating leads, and now you find yourself in 2 markets and 3 markets. And here we are today. You're the founder of one of the largest real estate companies in the world. And it's obviously the growth of eXp Realty has happened in a major way. You just mentioned 300 agents or so didn't seem like much, but you had this realization of that is a lot of people, and I gotta start thinking bigger. Here we are today. I don't know what the official number is, but my hunch is it's around 25,000 people, 25,000 agents or so. Being the leader and the founder of that is significantly different than the guy that started a real estate company or a real estate team, however many years ago. How has that changed you as a person? And what are the things that you've really, I guess, had to work on or had to take on with yourself to be able to become that person who then leads this big of a company?
Yeah, well, great question. One is nobody knows that they're in any different position than they are at any given moment. It's like meaning that I'm here, in my home office, talking to you, and life doesn't actually seem that much different than in 2008 for me as a person. The opportunities are, so this continuum, you are wherever you're at on the continuum, but the continuum goes infinite distance this way, and it goes an infinite distance this way. It just happens that this is where I'm at. And so I've always just thought about sort of business and life as basically being on this relative continuum. And I've always been a business guy. That's always been my MO. And I've always been a student. I read tons of books. I try to implement as much as possible what I'm learning. I've never really had a formal coach, but I've had some great mentors over the years. And I'm always been just experimenting with the business. The big difference or contrast between today and 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, I've been 2014. Is that 5 years ago I was much more involved in the day-to-day of the business, and we were just going into that sort of liftoff in 2015, and then I made the crazy decision to go on the road in a motor coach, and while we were starting to hit that sort of growth momentum, and then trying to keep the wheels on the wagon while traveling. That was fun. Of course,
I bet.
Of course, Jason Gessing's been with eXp almost since the beginning. Gabe LeBeau's been here for a long time. We've got a lot of people that have been around that were keeping things moving, but with that rapid growth rate, it was an all day, every day, pretty stressful time. Now that we've actually built a really talented team, I'm actually able to think a little bit more strategic and think a little bit more long term, and think about what other businesses might we get into, what does this mean at scale, where how do we sort of leverage this for our agents, and then how can we leverage this as a company, what other verticals potentially could we get into. So we're starting to get to the point where we're able to start to have those conversations, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, but you talk about You mentioned Jason Gessing's name and a few other people's names, and you've really added some amazingly talented people to this company, and it's easy to see why you're able to do some more of that high level thinking and really have that chairman position, if you will, truthfully, as opposed to just being the operator that you probably, I'm sure you wore that hat for quite a while as the operator of the business as well. So hats off to you if I had one right now, from that standpoint, because you've definitely, I will say from you as somebody who is an agent and customer, I guess, almost, if you will, as the company, interacting with some of these members of leadership has been really pleasant and really well received, if you will, knowing that it's truthfully, I don't just own some shares of the company as an agent and all of us have that opportunity. I truthfully feel like my voice and my opinion matters. And I know the other agents in this company feel the same way because they tell me all the time. So I could see how that has brought that new sort of ability to you to be able to think and truly act as the chairman and not always be in operator mode.
Yeah, no, it's we certainly built out, especially the last last year and a half. There's been some real key people that have joined us. Stacy Onen, Jeff Whiteside. We just brought on RJ Jones, who's got huge pedigree, that just joined us here just at around eXpCon. So he. What a pedigree. John Tobeson that just recently joined us, Seth Siegler. I mean, we've so many great people that have been joining us that actually, one, are really talented people, but are also continue to be innovative. And one of the things that I've started to recognize, that sometimes having really smart people that are really smart in a very narrow domain is not as good as having a really smart person who's more a generalist, because a generalist will allow more innovation to take place because they don't know. And so that's one of the things that's been kind of cool, is having a few more generalists around as well, because they're willing to sort of experiment and throw things against the wall a little bit and see what happens, which is that's more the entrepreneurial persona.
Yeah. Well, and that's what this company really feels like, is it's a company of entrepreneurs who are building something, like you said, and there's this vision, right? But it's moldable. Like, it's moldable along the way. One of our core values being agility. And that's one of the things I feel like it's very tactile as an agent in this company, that you can feel is the agility of the company to be able to do things. Everything from the things you just mentioned, maybe getting into different verticals and just the way the company has progressed and changed. You mentioned the word scale earlier, just a few moments ago. Like, how, in your eyes, like, how big can this scale?
Pretty big, yeah. We're if you think about 25,000 agents approximately, and there's 1.2 million realtors in the U.S. approximately. There's another 100,000 in Canada. There's another worldwide. There could be 20 million licensed real estate professionals, or some sort of real estate professionals around the world. Then 25,000 is a pretty small pebble.
Yeah.
And if we get to, right now we're close to 2% of the U.S. Realtor population, which is pretty cool. 2% of a really big industry. But you start to look at companies like Keller. They're over 10%. They're probably 12% or so. And so the potential of eXp, especially if we just continue to iterate around the model and just keep on making sure that we got the right ingredients, and that then I think we've got the potential eventually in 10 years, who knows, we could have 2, 3, 400,000 agents worldwide. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, we've talked about a number of times about 100,000 agents, and if you just take where we're at right now, and you grow by 50% year over year for the next 3 to 4 years, you're pretty much given you're going to be over 100,000 agents. So the one thing I will say is that as you know, you're involved with eXp. There's still a lot of stuff that's messy, like right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is being agile means that lots of stuff that other people might have as this is what we're doing. For us, it's always in beta. There is no done. And as long as we keep on approaching it as there is no done, then uh, then we can continue to iterate. We can continue to be flexible. We can adapt. We can do like Netflix, going from mailing DVDs to actually streaming video. We can sort of think about the idea of, of whether you think about, stuff that other technology companies have done. We can continue to actually make meaningful changes to where we're going. I really believe that in the next 3 to 4 years, agents won't have a traditional computer anymore for their primary device. It'll be either their iPad and I think some agents will literally be doing their business entirely from their phone if they're not already doing it, meaning that they look up their MLS info, they put together their contracts, they do everything without ever using any other device than their phone, which truly means that this thing is so mobile over time. And then with, who knows, with AI and some of the other stuff that we've got coming down the pipe, what's that going to play out relative to an agent's life, a consumer's life, and how does that all interact? And we have to be ready to be able to embrace some of those things as we continue to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. When I think about the opportunity to being really fully or 100% mobile or as close as possible. Yeah, I would agree. We're actually, as far as it's come, we're actually not even there yet. And, the possibilities that opens up is just so big. Something I noticed, because Facebook has this great way of reminding us of what happened a year ago, on this date, a year
Right.
ago and 2 years ago was a year ago last week. We closed on the purchase of Virbela. And so what did that, first of all, can you give for the few listeners maybe who don't understand what Virbela is, can you give us a quick overview and what has that purchase meant to you and to us as a company?
Yeah, so Virbela is basically our virtual world is powered, eXp World is powered on the Virbela platform. And Virbela is a talented team of engineers and developers and that grew out of the University of California, San Diego, UCSD. They actually were doing it for distance learning for the university setting, leadership education, and they were using a very modern gaming tool set. And so they built this. But for us, we'd been using Virbela for probably 2 years or so as their single largest customer. So we're the largest customer of Virbela. And we also recognized that they needed a little bit more investment than to beef out a lot of the stuff that they were doing. But being a customer really didn't give us the ability to truly help them continue to make some of the investments that they needed to do. The other part, of course, was that it's such an enabling technology for us that we didn't want to somehow lose the technology to a competitor. And in fact, we heard one of those competitors in January claim that he would bid the price up, which didn't actually truly happen, but that was his sort of spin. But we didn't want to find a competitor buying it and shutting it down, and then us having to try to find a new home, because there aren't a lot of really big platforms for this. We can think about companies like or games like Fortnite and there's a ton of multiplayer video games, but not built for the work setting. And being able to support, I mean, some of the stats on this thing is pretty amazing. We've had over 700, almost 800 people in one auditorium at one time in a live meeting with multiple people talking and conversing amongst each other. The next leading platform that's out there, I think they were bragging about doing about 130, 140 people. and when we told them how many people, they thought we were blowing smoke. But it was a Texas State compliance meeting in the auditorium, and this was probably 6 months ago or so. And so they got that many people to attend, and now we can have more than that actually could attend our leadership meetings on Friday if they chose to. But that's pretty cool. It's also fully, I'm really excited about it too, because it's a fully VR ready platform. So if we do see, and I've been playing with my Oculus Quest, but I can see that in the not too distant future, we're going to have some sort of flip down visor, and we're going to be able to have virtual computer screens on walls, kind of like what Microsoft HoloLens has done. But then, and then be able to go into a virtual setting if we choose to. Now, it's not really that practical for what we're doing, but if you think about sort of the future of where things are going, and if you've ever put on a fully immersive headset, it does fully immerse you. You feel like you're there. You forget you're in, your home or your office, and you're now engaged at a totally different level yet again. So I'm super stoked that we are where the future of work is right now. We've continued to expand the team, and I think we're going to see some big potential customers start to use it in a similar way that eXp does outside of the real estate space, because obviously we're not going to allow our competitors to use it.
That's good. That's good. I'd like to keep it that way. Well, that's awesome. Speaking of the future, and I know we got to wrap up here because we're coming up on time. What do you see, maybe in the next, call it 24 to 36 months, as things start to change in our industry, because technology has become such a bigger piece of what happens today in the real estate industry? I think because it finally has caught on, and we've been so far behind as an industry, that now we're starting to see this, everything from what we're doing at our company with, whether it be the VR stuff and just having the cloud campuses to whether it be the Zillows and Open Doors of the worlds, and just all these different startups that we're reading about, a different type of startup every day, in the news headlines. What do you see? Is there any really, whether it be a big threat that we need to quote unquote worry about, plan for, strategize around over the next couple of years, or what should we maybe be focused on over the next couple of years as an industry?
Well, the industry is always changing, and there's the reality is that but it doesn't change as fast as we as sometimes we get scared that the industry is going to change really fast. So in 2004, 2005, I remember that was the point in time. And literally, I remember, I think Keller was one of the first companies to actually give their listing data to Trulia. And I called Brian Ellington, who was there at the time. I said, Brian, you do know that you just slit the throat of every real estate agent in America. And so that was back in 2005 or 2004. I can't remember the exact year, but that was the beginning of the portal. That was the beginning of having the web-based competitor compete against the real estate agent. And I was a bit panicked at the time that it was going to change everything. And it has changed everything, but it's changed it fairly slowly, meaning that if you were an ambitious, resourceful agent, you probably didn't even notice it was taking place. If you were an agent who was coasting on their laurels of how you were doing the business, Zillow's starting to take a little bit of your market share and taking a little bit of your market share. And eventually you go, man, this real estate thing is a pretty tough gig and I need to leave the business. I think we're kind of in a similar scenario with the next thing, which is iBuying. I think we're at this point where it's obviously panicking a number of people that, Open Door, Zillow Offers, Redfin Now, are going to basically eat the lunch of real estate agents. I'm not super concerned. If you're a resourceful, ambitious agent, whether you're embracing iBuying or not, you're gonna grow your business because there's lots of different ways to do this. There's 5.5 million homes that sell each year, maybe a little bit more. It's multi-trillions of dollars. As we're talking about huge dollars. So it doesn't take a lot of of ambition and resourcefulness to continue to grow a business. I think one challenge I see agents maybe is they little light on their own personal innovations, meaning that they're sort of just taking whatever the coach that's been coaching for the last 10 years, and they're taking that same 10-year coaching plan and trying to apply it to their business, when they should be thinking about what's some of the new stuff I should be applying to my business to bring in new business that I'm not used to bringing in, and working that through to completion. So I think those are things to think about. But I do see the iBuying side as being something we do have to watch. You know, if Zillow is willing to lose money on every home that they buy, then that means that they will truly create disruption. I think they would ultimately take the market share on the iBuying side, but I don't know how long their income statement and balance sheet will allow that to take place. At some point, they get to a certain market share of whatever's going on and a certain number of leads that eventually they have to actually go back to actually wanting to monetize that business, in which case the real estate agent on a long-term basis will still net the consumer more on every transaction if it's properly marketed, or as I like to call a fully marketed listing. But right now, Zillow is willing to buy that market, and they raised $1 billion here recently. They'll probably have to raise another few billion to continue to do what they're doing, to actually do it at some sort of semblance of scale. But that's against a multi-trillion-dollar a year industry. So even if they raise $20 billion, which would be an incredibly large amount of money to raise, they would still only be a small fraction of the entire marketplace. So, so I think that, just being aware, paying attention, and then continuing to look at, what are you doing? How are you adding value to your clients? And then what's your franchisable service model that you're providing that nobody else provides? I think those are the things you just continue to focus on.
Yep, that's fantastic advice. Thank you. All right. So before we wrap up, any last thoughts or maybe questions I should have asked you that I didn't? Anything maybe you'd like to share that we haven't had the chance to get to yet?
Yeah. Well, we're excited about a number of different things. I mean, I don't want to be, I'll toot our horn a little bit. I'm really excited about the fact that we just just came out with our own agent healthcare initiative, and I know a number of people. There's 3 states that we can't do it in, like I think Washington, Alaska, and I think it's Vermont, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, there's 3 states that don't allow the way that we approached it. But for those who are who can take advantage of it, it's a huge savings over over traditional healthcare. So super stoked that we're able to do that. We've just rolled out, obviously, our Express Offers platform, and so that's in a small number of markets. But it's pretty cool because we're actually allowing anybody who's a actual legitimate buyer of typically 25 to 50 properties a year or more, be able to plug in and actually be a bidder through that type of platform. So it does, provide a platform for consumers to get closer to market value, but it's also a great lead generation tool for agents. So, if once we've got the requisite number of buyers in, say, Arizona on the platform, I'm not sure where we are in Phoenix, but I know it's coming because it's a huge iBuying market. You'll be able to actually have a widget right embedded on your site that can generate additional leads that are listing leads, as well as true iBuyer scenarios, and not have those folks end up in somebody else's ecosystem. So pretty excited about that. What else? Well, there's a lot of other things that we're working on, but I think just all in all, it's 2020 is going to be a good year.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, Glenn, I want to again just say thank you. I appreciate you on multiple levels. First of all, as the host of this podcast, thank you for coming out and sharing with us and just kind of talking with us around your story and what's going on and in the industry and eXp and all of that. So I just want to say thank you. But also, as an agent in the company that you started, I got to tell you, I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be a prouder member of a company. And so I just want to say thank you so much for what you do, man. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Kevin.
Hey, thanks a lot, Glenn. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great one.
Okay, you too. Talk
All
to you
right.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.